Picture the most powerful man alive. Not powerful in the way we use that word today. Not famous, not wealthy, not followed by millions of strangers on a screen. Powerful in the most literal, absolute sense the ancient world could produce. He commands the largest army on earth. He controls territory stretching from the deserts of North Africa to the forest of northern Britain. 60 million people live under his rule. His word is law. His silence is law. His mood shapes the fate of nations. He is the Emperor of Rome. And every single morning, before the meetings, before the dispatches, before the endless weight of empire presses down on him, he sits alone. He picks up a pen, and he writes to himself. Not for an audience, not for history, not for the philosophers who will quote him for 2,000 years after his death. He writes because he is losing a battle that no army can fight for him. The battle against his own mind. His name is Marcus Aurelius. He ruled Rome from 161 to 180 AD. He is considered one of the greatest emperors in the history of civilization. And the private journal he kept, never meant to be read, never meant to be published, recovered and preserved almost by accident, is one of the most honest documents a human being has ever produced. He called it, simply, To Myself. We call it the Meditations. And today, we are going to read it together, not as a history lesson, not as a self-help manual, as a mirror. Because whatever Marcus Aurelius was fighting inside himself 2,000 years ago, in a military tent on the banks of the Danube, you have felt it too. Before we can understand Marcus Aurelius, we need to understand the philosophy that held him together. Stoicism. The word has been flattened by modern use into something it was never meant to be. When people say someone is stoic today, they usually mean cold, emotionless, the kind of person who watches their world fall apart and feels nothing. That is not Stoicism. That is a misreading so complete it borders on the opposite of what the Stoics actually taught. Stoicism was founded in Athens around 300 BC, roughly a generation after Aristotle, by a man named Zeno of Citium, who famously began teaching in a painted porch, a stoa, which is where the name comes from. It spread across the Greek world, evolved through several generations of thinkers, and eventually became the dominant philosophy of the Roman educated class. And at its center was not the suppression of emotion. At its center was a single deceptively simple idea. There are things in your control and things that are not. That is it. That is the engine of the entire system. Everything in Stoic philosophy, every practice, every exercise, every insight, flows from that one distinction. Your thoughts are in your control. Your judgments are in your control. Your intentions, your values, the way you respond to what happens to you, all of that is in your control. What other people do, not in your control. What the weather does, what your body does, whether you are praised or punished, loved or abandoned, successful or ruined by circumstances beyond your reach. Not in your control. The Stoics called the things within your control your hegemonicon, your ruling faculty, your inner citadel, and they believed that this inner citadel was the only thing in the universe that could never be taken from you by force. Your body can be imprisoned. Your reputation can be destroyed. Your wealth can be stripped away in an afternoon. But no one, no emperor, no army, no disease, no disaster can reach inside your mind and change what you choose to value. That door, the Stoics said, locks from the inside. Marcus Aurelius did not invent Stoicism. He did not refine it or systematize it. He did something rarer and more difficult. He tried to actually live it. Every single day, in the most demanding conditions imaginable, while running an empire, while watching his children die, while fighting wars he did not start and could not end, while being surrounded by people who wanted things from him constantly and almost never asked how he was. He tried to live it, and he wrote down every morning, every night, every moment he could steal for himself the honest account of how it was going. Spoiler, it was hard. That is why we still read him. Let us slow down on the central idea, because it sounds simple until you apply it to your own life, and then it becomes the most confronting thing you have ever thought. The dichotomy of control. Think about the last time you felt genuinely anxious. Not the clinical kind, not the diagnosable kind, just the ordinary human experience of lying awake at night with a mind that will not stop producing catastrophes. What was it about? If you trace it back far enough, if you follow the thread of the anxiety all the way to its root, you will almost always find the same thing. Something you cannot control. What someone thinks of you, whether you will get the outcome you need, whether the person you love will stay, whether the risk you took will pay off, whether the world will be kind to you or cruel. Marcus Aurelius sat with this every single day of his reign. He writes in the Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But here is what he never pretended, and this is what separates him from every motivational poster that has ever borrowed his words without understanding them. He never pretended it was easy. He never wrote, "Simply focus on what you can control," with the breezy confidence of someone who has never actually tried to do it when the stakes are real. He writes to himself like a man in a fight, like someone who has understood the principle intellectually and is doing the grueling daily work of applying it to a life that keeps providing new reasons to panic. He writes, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." He writes it to himself as a reminder, because he had to keep reminding himself. That is the part the motivational posters leave out. Stoicism is not a revelation you have once and then live effortlessly. It is a practice, a daily, demanding, never-finished practice of returning to the same principle again and again, in different circumstances, under different pressures, with a different kind of tired every time. Marcus Aurelius returned to it every morning for 19 years of rule. That is not inspiration. That is discipline dressed up as philosophy, and it is the most honest account of what it actually takes to live well that any ruler in human history has ever left behind. There is a practice at the heart of Stoic life that makes most modern people deeply uncomfortable. The Stoics thought about death constantly, deliberately, as a discipline. Not because they were morbid, not because they were pessimistic, but because they had noticed something about human beings that we have somehow managed to forget in the 20 centuries since. We live as though we have unlimited time. We postpone the things that matter. We tolerate situations that diminish us. We leave words unspoken and risks untaken and versions of ourselves unlived, because somewhere in the background of our minds runs a quiet, persistent, completely irrational assumption that there will be time for all of that later. The Stoics called this the fundamental error, and they developed a practice to correct it. Memento Mori. Remember that you will die. Not as a threat, not as a punishment, as the most clarifying thought a human mind can hold. Marcus Aurelius writes, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." Read that again slowly. You could leave life right now. Not someday, not eventually, right now. What does that change about this day? What does it change about what you are tolerating? What does it change about what you keep putting off? What does it change about who you have not called, what you have not said, who you have not forgiven, including yourself? Marcus Aurelius buried 5 of his children. He watched Rome be devastated by a plague that killed up to 2,000 people a day at its peak, the Antonine Plague, which scholars believe killed 5 million people across the empire during his reign. He was not writing about death from a comfortable distance. He was writing about it from inside it. And what he discovered, what the Stoics had discovered and he was now living, was that proximity to death does not make life smaller. It makes it larger. When you truly accept that your time is finite, not as a concept, but as a felt, embodied daily reality, the trivial things stop costing you so much. The insult that would have ruined your week, the opinion that would have made you reshape yourself into someone smaller, the approval you have been waiting for before you allow yourself to begin. All of it shrinks. And what is left, what was always there underneath the noise, is the actual shape of your life, the actual people, the actual work, the actual values. Memento Mori is not a reminder that you will lose everything. It is a reminder that you have something right now worth having. If Memento Mori is the practice of accepting your own finitude, there is a companion idea in Stoic thought that goes even further. Not just accepting what is, loving it. The Latin phrase is Amor Fati, love of fate. The idea that everything that happens to you, not just the good things, not just the manageable setbacks, but the devastating things, the unfair things, the things that break you open in ways you did not consent to. Everything is raw material. Marcus Aurelius writes, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He is not saying obstacles are secretly blessings in disguise. He is not offering you the toxic optimism of someone who has never suffered. He is saying something stranger and harder and truer than that. He is saying that the obstacle itself, the actual, real, painful obstacle, is the material you work with, not around it, not after it is resolved, not once things get better. The obstacle is the work. Marcus Aurelius spent most of his reign at war. He had not wanted to be a soldier. He had wanted to be a philosopher. He was trained as one. He identified as one. And then history handed him an empire on the verge of collapse, barbarian invasions from the north, plague from the east, and a bureaucracy of people who wanted things from him every hour of every day. He did not get the life he planned. He got the life he got. And what the Meditations record, imperfectly, honestly, beautifully, is his daily attempt to find the way through it. Not the way around it, through it. Amor Fati is not gratitude dressed up in Latin. It is something more demanding than gratitude. It is the refusal to spend your finite energy wishing reality were different than it is, and the choice, made again and again, to work with what you have. Most of us have smaller obstacles than Marcus Aurelius. Most of us have less excuse. I want to stop here and say something about the person behind these ideas, because it would be easy to read the Meditations and picture a man of granite, serene, unshakable, a philosopher king floating above the chaos of human life with a calm expression and perfect posture. That is not who wrote those pages. The man who wrote the Meditations was someone who had to remind himself every single morning to get out of bed. He writes, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting up, tell yourself, I have to go to work. As a human being, what do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for?" He struggled with sleep. He struggled with motivation. He struggled with people who disappointed him, decisions that haunted him, and the constant grinding awareness that the role he was performing was larger than any human being was built to carry alone. He writes about anger, not as someone who never felt it, but as someone who felt it constantly and had to work daily not to let it become him. He writes, "How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it?" He writes about loneliness, about the difficulty of finding anyone in his position he could truly trust. He writes about the temptation to compromise, to let the role consume the person, to become the emperor so completely that Marcus disappears inside it. And he keeps writing, every day, as an act of resistance against that disappearance. The Meditations are not a record of a man who had it figured out. They are a record of a man fighting, with philosophy as his weapon, to remain himself. To remain a person inside a life that was constantly trying to turn him into a symbol, a function, a throne. And that, more than any of the ideas themselves, is why these pages matter. Because most of us are not emperors. But most of us know what it is to have the shape of our days determined by forces larger than us, to feel the person we actually are being slowly crowded out by the person the world needs us to be. Marcus Aurelius looked at that pressure, which in his case was arguably the largest any individual human being has ever faced, and he said, "Not today." Every morning with a pen he said, "Not today." Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD. He died at a military camp on the Danube frontier, still at war, still working, still writing. He was 58 years old. His son Commodus succeeded him and became, by most historical accounts, one of the worst emperors Rome ever produced. Vain, cruel, delusional, everything his father had spent a lifetime trying not to be. History has a brutal sense of irony. But before we feel too sorry for Marcus Aurelius, before we frame his story as a tragedy, consider what he actually left behind. Not an empire. Empires fall. Not a dynasty. Dynasties rot. He left behind a document written to no one, for no reason, with no audience. A private conversation between a man and the best version of himself. And that conversation has been read by more people, in more languages, in more centuries, than almost any other book ever written. Because it is not really about him. It is about the thing that does not change across 2,000 years of history. The interior battle every conscious human being has to fight. The battle to remain yourself when the world keeps pressuring you to be something else. The battle to act well when no one is watching. The battle to care about what is actually worth caring about. In a world that is very good at making the trivial feel urgent and the essential feel optional. Stoicism, in the end, is not a philosophy for people who have it together. It is a philosophy for people who are trying, who get up in the morning knowing it will be hard, who sit with the gap between who they are and who they intend to be, and choose to close it, even slightly, even imperfectly, one more time. Marcus Aurelius failed at this constantly. He says so himself, on page after page. And he kept going anyway. That is the only wisdom that has ever actually mattered. Not the person who never struggles. Not the philosophy that makes everything easy. The person who struggles and understands why and chooses to struggle well. So ask yourself tonight, with the same honesty Marcus Aurelius forced on himself every morning for 19 years. What is actually in your control right now, and what are you spending energy on as though it were? What are you postponing because you are living as though time is unlimited? What obstacle in your life, the one you have been treating as a wall, might actually be the path? These are not comfortable questions. He never asked comfortable questions. He asked the ones that mattered. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. This is Philochemy. We will see you in the next one.